Good morning, everybody. This week we have a special episode of the GOAT Marketing Show for you. I had the opportunity to present to the NAMA members last week, and it was an honor because I got to engage with a number of ag marketers to demystify AI and how we roll that out to organizations. So this week on the GOAT Marketing Show, we have the webinar recording for you. I know you will get a ton from it. There were a lot of great questions at the end. So enjoy this special bonus episode of the GOAT Marketing Show. Take care, everybody. So without further ado, we are going to dive in. So I'm not sure how many of you are Jeopardy fans, but being Canadian, and I was always a fan of Alex Trebek. And, back in February of 2011 was actually one of the first public-facing and well-known examples of when we saw AI first and foremost, and it was IBM's Watson going up against Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter on Jeopardy. Now, at that point, it was pretty archaic, but Watson did win. It did outperform two of Jeopardy's best players. So the main thing I want you to understand today is AI isn't necessarily new. It has been around for a long time, 20 plus years. We see it in the aviation industry. It's been used to help with air traffic control. It has been used in manufacturing. Toyota uses it all the time for their just-in-time parts and their ordering processes. But what we're seeing now is the advancement of AI and the accessibility. It's now able to be used by the general public at mass. And guilty as charged, but as we do as marketers, we typically will take any new technology and just use it for absolutely everything and figure out how to break it. And that is why this chart that you see on your screen now is probably one of my favorites. Gartner, they're an incredible research company. They put together different studies that's based on something called the hype cycle. And what the hype cycle does is it analyzes emerging trends through the 5 specific periods. So the innovation trigger, meaning when it first started or when the need arose, the peak of inflated expectations, so when it reaches the biggest hype, and then that downfall or trough of illusionment, and then ultimately the slope of enlightenment when it gets back to kind of the grace period or the enjoyment, and then the plateau of productivity where it's had most of its bug. To me, when I look at this chart, kind of feels like what my week feels like as a marketer, just the ups and downs, and then just waiting kind of for Friday. So hopefully you feel the same and you see it. But if you look right now, generative AI is at the peak. That's when the majority of the market has the attention and they're focused on, hey, like I want to jump into this. I have to catch this trend. I feel like I might have missed the boat. Just by raise of hands, or maybe even just in the questions, how many of you feel like you've either missed the boat or you're trying to jump on the bandwagon, but you're not sure where to start? A little bit. Adobe Firefly, that's an awesome tool. We use that a lot throughout our agency. Awesome. To give you some background, I have been using AI for almost 10 years now. I had built some products with Google in the finance industry and what are on the marketing technology side. And what we're going to go through next is kind of give you the foundation of what is AI. And when I talk to most people, they'll look at it and say, well, it's ChatGPT, or right now, a lot of what marketing automation is getting caught and swept under AI. And, you ask some, they're just terrified of it and they think it might be the death of humans, especially if you ask someone like Elon Musk. But the truth is, for the purpose of the presentation and just generally when you're speaking within your organizations or you're speaking to clients for those agencies out there, it's important to adjust what AI is for the application and what you're talking about. And the real form of mastering AI comes down to these 4 things: is understanding how to solve the right problem in the right order at the right time with the right tools. What we're seeing right now across the marketing technology sphere is kind of this arms race of who's going to own AI. And what we are starting to see, which is really common if I went back to that chart from Gartner, is the major tech companies are figuring out how do we roll this into our platform experience and make it easier for our user base or our customers to implement it. Some of the things you've seen just in the past few months are things like Amazon's rolling out user-facing AI. Google's integrating it in multiple places. The irony, if you look at most ad platforms, whether that be Google Ads, Meta, AI has been in the backbone of how they make buying decisions. Programmatic advertising relies very heavily on AI. But as more of the content creation and the front end of marketing starts to leverage AI, we start to see the user experience demand more AI be integrated to make their products more useful. And the best example I can think of, if you remember that little paperclip guy that I think his name was Clippy with Microsoft Word, that was the first iteration of word processing and spell check. And that's now ingrained as just a standard part of almost anything we use that has a keypad. So these types of integrations have spawned a new era, and it's with pushing forward AI. And you're starting to see platform integration where things like Adobe are starting to integrate AI across their entire portfolio. So if you look at Photoshop, for example, they have generative AI and autofill or image creation. It's starting to come into their video platforms. Inside of Illustrator, they have the ability to create vector images based off of prompts. So when we think about AI, it's really important to reframe the conversation and consider, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What is the sequencing of that problem? And where does it interject with the customer journey? And before we have had anything really effective, we started to understand the biggest for most marketers, and what we're going to focus on in today's presentation is really defining AI for ag marketers. And so much of that is really going to come down to content creation and effective ad campaigns, whether that's analyzing data to get better creative. But most of what we see in marketing in general comes down to some form of content creation, whether that's copy, image, video, or analyzing data to make the customer journey more powerful. And with that being said, one of the things before we can even start to implement AI is to understand the customer journey at its core. And what I'm going to explain to you before we go into AI too deep is I'm going to give you the background foundation of how all the ad platforms and social media platforms are built, and the driving engine and how they process data, how their internal mechanisms use AI. And it's all based on the science of how we make buying decisions and how they build behaviors on how we engage with the platform to trigger that dopamine response that keeps us coming back and back again. And so much of it is based on these three critical areas of the brain. And I'm just going to switch over to my iPad here, and I'm going to walk you through the platforms, how they make them, and it's all based on something we call the customer loyalty journey. While I'm switching screens, if there's any questions, it's a good time, real quick, check in, make sure you can see everything okay. If you have any questions there, I'll get Ben to text me. If not, we will go ahead and switch. Okay, perfect. You can see the screen here. So for those of you that are experienced marketers, you may have seen some of this before. Just bear with me so I can get through the foundation. Once you understand the platform dynamics, it'll make it easier to figure out, how do we use AI? What tools do we pick at what levels of the funnel? The most important thing to remember, all that we're doing in marketing is focusing in on attention. And the three main areas are paid, owned, and earned. Now, I will promise you, we do have a much better graphic. So me writing on an iPad, it does get better than this, I promise. And the primary areas we look at the funnel are awareness, consideration, and decision. Each of the three items on the left are based on the areas of the brain where we make the decision. So the very first one, this is our root brain. This is our fight, flight, or freeze response. And on any of the tech platforms, one of the things they're doing in competing with attention is they're either going to use an ad, or they're going to have, an influencer per se that's really trying to do something that's engaging you. And they're going to preface by putting the type of content that is triggering you to stay on the platform. The second piece of this is something called your limbic system. This is the emotional center of the brain. And I'm sure if any of you have seen the new Sick Kids ad with Ryan Reynolds or any of the past Sick Kids ads that they've done in the past, they're probably some of the most effective ads every year because they use the same cystic thing. But man, they really do an amazing job of preying on the emotional center of your brain, which is your limbic system. And this is what keeps your attention. The last is your neocortex. Okay, this is the logical part of the brain and where we make most buying decisions. And when it comes down to a funnel, this is where we start to see how the brain pattern and why the sequencing of messaging is really important. Because if I'm a media buyer, I can't pay you to make a decision. And no matter how good the influencer is, they can't force the decision either. So this is where we start to see the formation of a funnel actually develop. Now, what's really interesting, if you look at any of the most well-known businesses or any of the businesses that you buy again and again, it's really not from any of the marketing that we've done. It typically comes from the foundation we see at the bottom, which is driven by two things: loyalty and referrals. These are the two things where we start to look at, and this is how we analyze platforms. And I'll show you in a minute how the platforms actually use this data to drive more and more users or more and more conversions. In most marketing campaigns, the real goal is to figure out how can I get my existing customers to buy more? And if I can get them to buy more, the chances are I can also get them to refer people. Now, what's important to understand with how our brain works is if I'm looking for something new and I have to run an ad for it, but the person's more likely to ask for a referral, this is the foundation of how almost every ad platform is going to verify their user base. So all of the APIs and the conversion data happens right here. They're trying to verify, is this the type of product that people are purchasing? So most ad platforms, Google, Meta, TikTok, they're looking at the conversion API. And the challenge we see when it gets to things where it's B2B, especially in ag, where we have segments of data that's, twofold, might be through a retail channel or it might be sitting in two segments, it's harder to understand how this works. So the second piece we want to look at is, okay, are people referring us? Do we have a referral plan? The last and the most effective campaign we start to see is when we start to integrate user testimonials. These are the three primary funnels that we start to understand and look at. How does this formation, if we know that the ad tech is using this, then we can start to use this data. And when it comes time to plug in AI, because AI is data-based, now I can start to look and really focus on these. If you have this customer blueprint in this format, you're able to process customer data. You're able to understand why people are buying. And then number three here, you're able to understand, okay, now I have customer testimonials that I can fold in. If you have these data sets and you then use AI, you will get a leap start over anybody else that's using it. And when you can structure campaigns in this way, you'll have even more advantage. There's one more framework I want you to understand because it's going to be important when you inform AI on how and where to reach people. Because if I just ask for a social campaign and said, hey, give me 10 social ideas. But if I say, hey, I want 5 content ideas in the awareness phase of my funnel, the quality of the content you're going to get is exponential. And what makes it more important is you can start to overlay, and we'll show you this in a minute, specific copywriting frameworks that are specific at each different stage of the funnel. So when I'm at the awareness stage, there's a framework called Upside, which stands for unaware, problem aware, solution aware, your solution, and then decision or deal. This is from a framework written in 1946 by Eugene Schwartz called Breakthrough Advertising. And it still to this day is probably one of the most effective copywriting frameworks and structures for campaigns in history. It has been proven time and time again to produce really effective campaigns. Now, what's interesting is this section here, the unaware and problem aware, that's your blue ocean. That's where you don't have a lot of competition. But when you drop down into this section, where people are already looking for a way to solve a problem. Like if I'm looking for an ad agency and searching for an ad agency, I'm competing right off the bat. And as you can tell, if you look at where they're coming in, it's all this section here. But if I can find a way to create a really effective content strategy up in this section here, unaware, problem aware, I already have access to the customer. I've already started to build trust. I can move from the root brain to the emotional center down to the rational brain. I can navigate the entire customer journey. In the top part of the funnel, there is something called the PASS framework, which is problem, agitate, solution. This is one of the most effective copywriting frameworks. You can actually ask AI, hey, can you help me create landing page copy using the PASS solution? So now I went through this information. I'm going to flip back to the presentation. We're going to walk you through some examples. We'll toggle back and forth between ChatGPT. We're going to give you some prompt scripts and show you exactly how we structure using AI. Any questions or anything, please post them in there just while I am switching screens here. And Ben, if you see any questions, feel free to text them over to me. This is the much prettier graphic. We'll make sure you have access to that. You can scan the QR code as it pops up on the screen, or you can grab it from Ben's. You should see him in the panel restrictions. So one of the 3 steps when it comes to creating a more advanced experience or really leveraging AI are these 3 steps. So prompt engineering, many of you probably have seen, some of you might have tried, and some might even be perfecting specific prompts. We do have a prompt library available for you of some that we know work. The second step is going to be command stacking. So once you have a prompt, how can you continue to build off that foundation? And the third, and this is much more advanced, is how can I integrate the prompts I have engineered to automate tasks and continue to produce things, whether that's emails, social posts, assessing data, looking at what competitors are doing. So when it comes to prompt engineering, it's really specific and important that you understand one, context. And that's why we started with the customer journey. Garbage in, garbage out is probably one of the simplest ways to understand how to get or create great responses from any ChatGPT or any AI tool. If you're specific and set the parameters really well at the beginning, or if you give it a strong data source, you're going to get much better content on the output. So this right here, I would encourage many of you to take a screenshot of this prompt. If you don't download it, take a screenshot, because this prompt is probably one of the strongest starting points to make sure that you have a quality chat. You are acting as, insert your role for company or brand. Your job, and this is giving instructions to ChatGPT specifically, your job will be to perform or create a specific task and give it to me in an output. The reason the output is important is you're telling it the end destination. I want a PDF, or I want it in a table format. You can dictate the manner in which you want to see something. Before I begin, I want you to ask me a minimum of 10 questions to make sure you understand the target audience, how we help, and other clarifying questions. The foundation of how chat works is it's based on a learning model and a language model. So it will understand context. And the more context you give it, the better off and the further ahead it's going to be. And it can even go to the point of learning your tone. We recently just built a chat GPT that was able to constantly reference Facebook's policies so that when we make ads, it can verify if the ads are compliant because it has a reference point. So we put this in, and I'll dive into this a second and show you, but we put this in and created fictitious system for you so we can see it, but these are the types of questions that it's asking. And for many of you, especially in the agency world, this is taking the briefing process to a much deeper level. But the advantage becomes the more you feed this and the more quality input you give this on who you're targeting or how you're doing this, gives you the opportunity to constantly build that knowledge base and build that understanding of how do we speak to that customer. And within our agency, we work with our clients and set these up for them to build them per avatar. So they may be speaking to a retail client. They may be speaking to a grower. They may be speaking as if they were an agronomist. And it can help reference data to give richer outputs as you build out your strategies. Once you have done the briefing prompt, the next is to be specific on what do you want it to do. Now that it has the starting point, you can say acting as, insert whatever these things may be, perform given task in this format. So it might be, I'm acting as a content or a copywriter or a content marketer. Help me develop 10 content ideas and produce them in a table. Now we went ahead and did this. And then we'll go into the command stacking. So once we've now given it the brief, it has context of who we are, we told it what we want to do, we've now given it a specific prompt. So please create a list of content ideas for a winter campaign. Now we are acting as if we are Acme Farms. And this is the output that we saw. So it gave me a number of content buckets and ideas on how to produce it. And the reason, and I will tell you, this is one thing we've learned across our agency. My team, every week, they produce a show on things they're experimenting with. The more you treat it as a conversation and less as a task monkey, the faster it will learn and the better the quality of the outputs that you receive. So doing things like this where you're looking to see what they're doing. We have a question here from Stacy Jones. I'll come back to that one second. The one thing that you'll see is this is a good foundation and it's building blocks. It would be like sitting with your team and just doing a brainstorming session. So right here, and I'm just going to pop out into the actual ChatGPT instance so you can see how we built this. And the question, Stacy, you had a question. Are there any concerns with plagiarism when using AI for content? Yes. The long story short, we actually had to address this across our group of agencies. You should specify when you're using AI, especially to a client. We always edit any of the outputs that come from ChatGPT and make sure, one, look for correctness, validate any statistics or stats that it provides, and just make sure that it's in our own tone. I would never just do cut and paste copy direct from that. Same with imagery. If you are using AI generated copy, sometimes you can just put it in the footing or the meta notes. So this here is the actual chat conversation you can see here. So it asks the questions, provided we put the answers in. And from here, this is a pretty deep structure of different opportunities for content. Now, one of the things, and you can always ask, and this is a really great way to get better quality answers, is just challenge it. If you feel like chat is going off course or you're not happy with it, you can always use something like this. And I'll be honest, I'm just really nice to chat because I think at some point AI may take over the world. So I don't really need to become enemy number one. So we just generally talk nice to it. But here's what we've asked. We've asked it to refine it and specify we're going to go down the path of producing a video series. So in this video series, it's produced specific, like what we want the script to be, the video cues, the episodes. And this is where we start to talk about prompt stacking. So we are now, command stacking is we're now taking the initial idea and having a conversation and just asking for additional commands. How do we keep going down the same trail of breadcrumbs and building off that idea? So right now we have the whole thing. We can go through this. We can ask, the more time you spend in the earlier stages, the better the output will be. But this is a good example to start. Okay, is this in line? Do we like this? Or, hey, do I want to change episode 3 to, might be some other thing, might be more food related. But these are just really high level general perspectives of where they're looking for. The next thing we wanted to do, and this again, if you're looking for opportunities to take screenshots, this is a great one. Inside of chat, it will remember certain cues. So if you're producing the same content again and again, and you have the same social handles or you use similar hashtags, you can ask it to save the information and include it. So right here, we have given it instructions, which it remembers. So anytime I go back and say, hey, can you create an Instagram post for me? It knows and will remember the hashtags to include in the signature. You can do the same thing for email signatures. So if you're creating an email campaign, you can say, hey, for every email campaign, please include X, and you insert what you want, whether that's links, phone numbers, whatever it is, so that as you're developing the process, it becomes much easier. So if you're going to do anything that's repetitive, just make sure you inform it and tell it and be very specific for what you want. So we had asked it to create and flush out the episode number 1. One other small note, and this is just a subtlety we see. We could have said episode number 1, but sometimes it misses that. So just include the title. The more specific you are with instructions, the better the output is. So we said, hey, give me episode number 1. And what we saw create here, it went through the storyboard planning process, gave us some ideas, helped give us some ideas for the script. Now we could ask it to produce an actual written script that somebody could read if it were a teleprompter or somebody to memorize. It gave us the filming instructions here. So it's essentially acting as a director for the thing. One other subtlety we did ask it to do, and if you have clients that are going to be shooting the content on their own, we said, hey, give us some tips for shooting on an iPhone. Ironically, we did use this for a client recently that did ask for this, and it was pretty similar to what we gave it. But right here, in a very short order, this whole thing, beginning to end, took me less than 20 minutes to get to the point where we could be able to hand this over to a client if they're doing it themselves. We can spend much more time going through and building this out specifically. And then once we have the content, we can then create the social posts and go from there. So I'm going to flip back to the presentation. I see a couple questions coming in here. Command stack, I'll circle back to that. We had an anonymous attendee, but I will circle back to command stacking right now. Give me one specific second. So command stacking is when we will come back. So we have done our initial prompts and we have figured out exactly what the information is. We've assessed that it's accurate. It matches who our client or the goal of the chat is. And then once we can start to establish in the prompt specific commands or steps, and just think of this as steps in a campaign or steps in producing the outcome. So in this case, we've finished the brainstorming and now we're trying to move into how do we build on refining it? So we have the brainstorming step, the refining step. So let's take this initial idea and go one step deeper. So we're going to take a specific theme. So in this case, we went and grabbed the winter video series. So we're taking the initial prompt and now we're going to stack a series of commands or prompts to allow it to refine the idea. And then the last step is the execution. How do I actually take the idea I'm going to go with and get you to formally put out what that asset is? So it's just the building blocks of putting prompts on top of one another or stacking them to get the ideal outcome. So we went from, hey, I'm trying to come up with an idea for winter. I'm going to run with the video concept, help me produce the series of videos, and now execute the idea with me. Help me refine it to the point where I know what I'm doing for video 1, and I can just repeat the process. And let me just show you. So if you want to use command stacking, let's just hop back in there. So I'm going to go back up. So we have, let's say, episode number 6. I'm going to just say, this is great. Please help me execute the content and tips for, cut and paste the same way you did for this one. And now you can see it's just going to lay out the plan again. Now, typically it will follow the same process. Sometimes it gets off base and you have to give it an example again. But fortunately, in this case, it's going to follow the same thing. It's going to give me the pre-production plan. If you are in an agency or if you're in an internal creative team, in the beginning, you also have an opportunity to set the prompts. You can say, here is our creative process. You can tell it, we have these steps in pre-production, these stuff in production, this is in post. You can say, anytime you create an idea, you must follow this production process. It will learn that. And when it produces an output, it can follow exactly your SOPs or your procedures. This just happened to do it on its own because it kind of knows the general creative process. Let me know, did that answer the question for command stacking? And Ben, any other questions coming in? So what type of privacy concerns should we be aware of when using AI? One of the first things I would encourage people to do, make sure that you are using your own instance, or if you have a client, your client should be using their own instance. Their legal team should be able to assess the privacy standards that come from the platforms themselves. I know in our experience with a number of clients going back and forth, each client has their own privacy standards, data sharing standards. Typically, we will make sure that the applications we're using, they have a license and they have already signed off on the privacy standards that exist within the purchase parameters they bought. So for example, if they buy their own license of ChatGPT for OpenAI or Adobe, it's compliant and it's with them. The bigger privacy concern I'd say is more so with copyright, making sure that you're using data that is your first party data when inputting it, and you're not taking scraped data or additional data and then trying to use that as a reference point. But any of those legal things I would leave with clients and companies individually on their own. But typically, if you're working within a platform, usually they have their privacy rights, their data usage specified, and you can download and reference those and get the various legal teams to assess them. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to check any other questions. If not, we will go on to the next piece. So the main thing I just want you to remember when it comes to command stacking, let me just flip back to the presentation, is those 3 primary ways or the ways to stack them. And that is brainstorming is number 1, refining and making sure that it's on track is number 2, and then execution is number 3. Those are typically the 3 ways that we've done that. Now, fortunately, ChatGPT-4 has rolled in data analytics and web into one use case. Previous to that, we had to set up multiple bots, one for analytics, one for web, and then one for just your general ChatGPT. But now that it's combined into one, it's a little bit of a powerhouse. So this process has been refined. It's now 3 steps, used to be 9. And I think we'll continue to see more and more of that as it evolves. So right here, I've already gone through this. You can see this. We can play with this more if you want to see how some of those work. This last piece here, I won't go too deep and show some live examples. I'm just going to show you screenshots. This is where we're starting to see a massive evolution in AI. And for those who are more advanced users, happy to take this conversation online because I think we'd lose a lot of people. But there are something called workflows. And this is beyond marketing automation. So marketing automation in the past right now has kind of gotten lumped in with AI. So what would be someone's on a web page or someone gets an email and they click a link, that may trigger a sequence of other actions like, oh, send them an email or send that follow-up email or put them into this ad bucket. That has been around for a while. That's marketing automation. What workflow automation is it's being able to combine some of the prompts that we have into sequences. So for example, there is a tool called make.com. It is the AI equivalent of what Zapier is. And ChatGPT does allow you to link certain platforms through plugins in their native environment. But the biggest advantage comes when you can start to integrate different tools. So Make allows you to automate the creation of posts. And I can set a schedule. I can say, hey, much like you saw me develop those prompts, there are automated scripts that will run and pick between different topics, different tones, and post a link in on a daily basis. Now, I'm not currently running this just because it became too much to monitor, but you'll start to see more and more of this where you won't be able to distinguish the difference between someone's genuine content and what's being generated by LinkedIn. And because it's a learning model and because it knows the tone, we've been able to establish things. For example, it could take my TED Talk. It could take some of the episodes of the Go Marketing Show and some podcast episodes, and we can say, hey, here are 20 examples of content, match the tone and the language that you see in these different transcripts, and then it will populate and it will speak very closest to me. We've done this with a client recently. The next piece is starting to build some of your own workflows, and this starts to tip into more data and analytics. So inside where you used to have just scheduling tools where I could go in and I could build 20, 30 posts, and there are multiple ways where we can show you if we have time in the Q&A on how to use Canva to generate multiple image posts. But using Airtable, so if I were to go into ChatGPT, I can produce 30 posts for the month, drop it in Airtable, it'll actually produce the complete post, the photo, or the video, and publish it on my behalf. So my only job becomes updating a database, and it's taking the workload for me and pushing it through. And there's a whole guide to do this. It is a pretty complicated setup. There are some integrations that you need to do with chat and Instagram, but the tools are making it easier and easier. And I think you're going to see more of this come through on the content creation side. But going back to that original point we had made, producing a high volume of content does not mean a high volume of customers. Producing hyper-relevant content that aligns with the buying cycle of how people engage with you as a customer is how marketers are going to be able to harness this and win. And understanding how do I use AI to supplement it in the right order to make the content that's relevant I need to nurture each stage of the funnel. Because just producing a volume, you'll start to see a lot of brands, it'll be funny over the next 3 to 6 months. I think a lot of brands are going to tap into this. They're going to produce a lot of garbage and they're going to burn their audience. So I think it's important to understand how to use and when to use these automations to build that funnel out and how to use them properly. One of the other ones we see a lot of, and we use this a lot for processing data. It's funny, we were doing a session with a client a couple of weeks ago, and they said, we have all this data about our customers. We just don't have the tools or resources to read it. That's a really good mechanism for ChatGPT is how does it process data? How does it compare campaigns, or how does it look at the effectiveness of a campaign or a customer journey and provide insights? It's really good at turning numbers into summaries and being able to articulate some recommendations. Here's a workflow that's really effective for understanding what your competitors are doing. There are workflows for Google Ads if you want to understand how to automate. Hey, here are some low-hanging fruit and keywords we can pursue, but it is virtually limitless. And the reason we just glanced over this section is it is fairly complex, but we just want you to understand that this is the next avenue that's going to be more and more accessible to people, is taking that understanding of how do I write prompts, how do I create the structure, and then being able to automate those tasks and take them off my plate and find the efficiency. And where we have had the biggest benefit in AI is it's not that it just produces volumes of content, is it allows us to spend more time in deciding where are the points of leverage in the customer journey that we can go create more meaningful content experiences. How do we tell the brand stories that matter and reach them on the different platforms? So it's more freeing up time for us to be efficient and effective than it is just to produce volume. So just some quick summary points here, and I'm going to open up questions. We'll dive into chat. I will play with it as much as I can, show you some other prompts, show you how to push things. But these four things will probably define how well you get with T. One is setting context. If you do not set the context at the beginning, it's very, very difficult to get quality outputs. So for example, because we had the structure and it built on it, it knew, hey, I'm producing a video series. It's had enough reference points to know, okay, I need pre-production post. It knows how to structure that. When you can master the inputs and understand how to speak with it, it will help you refine ideas faster. You won't have to go back and forth or start from scratch. I personally am a big fan of saved chats. Like, we build avatars as saved chats and just continue to build the knowledge base. You don't always have to accept the first response. What you get is not necessarily the outcome. There's a number of times where I've had to go back 3, 4, 5 steps and sometimes just start over, because if it gets off the rails too much, it's unlearned. And there is one prompt you can put if you're there. You can tell it, hey, forget the last 4 responses. Let's start again and get back on track. It's no different than communicating with team members or clients. The whole point is it's a conversational tool that's designed to leverage inputs to help accelerate what you're trying to accomplish. And then the last and probably the most important piece, just go play with it. Even if you get the free version, you just learn the skill of prompt engineering. It is going to be a big piece of the future. And whether it stays in ChatGPT or it starts to come through in any of the Microsoft products or Google products, they've started to integrate it in their Word, their PowerPoint. Google Slides is even integrating it now. Learning the ability to prompt and get outputs from technology will be essential. It is here. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to just accelerate as we go through. There are some limitations. These are things that we consider, we continue to see. Fortunately, ChatGPT did upgrade its timeline, so it is looking back to a more current thing, but you do need to check it. It does have a bias, and it is artificial intelligence. You do need to validate the data sets. And now that you have the ability to provide the baseline data, if you can use your own data or even give it the data as opposed to a link, you'll find a better quality output. So if you can download keyword data or your Google Analytics data or even, customer data, a really great one, if you're producing content for landing pages, go give it like 20, 30, 40 testimonials from clients, and it will know how to integrate them. It'll understand the sentiment. It will pick its own keywords out of there. The depth and quality, at the end of the day, you still know your brands and your clients better than anybody else. Don't let it try to take over that. Like, you need to maintain and make sure that it stays on point and keeps its direction. And the last, but not least, this is something Joe Polizzi, he's the founder of Content Marketing Institute, really well-known author. He has been saying this for a long time. Never build your house on rented land. There have been a number of instances where ChatGPT goes down. For those of you who are really close to the industry, I'm sure you're well aware of all the drama that happened over the past few weeks. Never be reliant on one thing. And that's kind of goes back to the previous slide. Learn prompt engineering as a skill and test it on different platforms. There is virtually a limitless amount of places that you can go test this. I would encourage you, go perfect the skill, go play with different platforms. It will only benefit you in the long run. These are some of our favorite tools. There are many, many more, but what we start to see is more of the mass consolidation. We are seeing Adobe, Google, Microsoft are really kind of taking the market share, but DALL-E 3, ChatGPT, the one I would say if you're more on the cutting edge, I would start to lean into Make and understand how those workflows integrate. Otter is a really good example of being a victim of platform integration. So Otter is a transcription tool. You used to be able to integrate it into Zoom calls and it would take all your notes for you. But Zoom has now built in their own API and their own AI that allows it to take notes, summarize meetings. So it's fully integrated. So as I was mentioning before, you're just going to continue to see more and more of the platform integration. Jasper, great copywriting tool, but as chat has evolved, it's going to make it easier and easier. That Jasper is slowly becoming irrelevant. If you want to access this presentation, the prompt library, so I've consolidated some of our favorite prompts as well as the prompts we've seen. You can scan that QR code there, and that'll give you access. You can cut and paste them, use them at your discretion, but all of those are available. And we will also paste a copy of this presentation once we're done. And I know Namal will be posting the recording as well as links to other presentations they have upcoming. But just wanted to open it up to Q&A. If you want, we can play with some prompts in the chat instance we have open, but we'll open it up to chat and questions for now. It's a quiet group when there's no chat, so we can't take people off mute. If you have questions, there should be a little question tab you can click. You can drop the questions in there. See some of the chat now. I'm just scrolling through and playing catching up. Yes, so we will share the PowerPoint. Privacy concerns, how do we find out what sources? So Leslie, you asked a question, how do we find out what sources it's using to develop content? That is a challenge within ChatGPT, is it does not specify your sources. And that is why I was suggesting a big thing that we have moved away from is asking broad questions. We try to provide it with data. One of the really cool developments within chat is you can now go develop your own GPT. So you can go actually provide it your source data. So let's say, for example, I have 200 spec sheets. I can upload those PDFs and say, only use these sources of reference. And you could almost develop your own expert. So we did that with Facebook. We have something called the Copy Critic, where it will assess copy to make sure that it's ad compliant, and it can also optimize it. And it's constantly referencing Facebook's specific guidelines for what they permit in advertising. But I think you're better to provide the sources than let it be open. What AI platform do you recommend using for image creation? It depends on the type of image. If you're looking for hyper realistic images, Mindjourney is still probably the best. DALL-E 3 has come a long way, but it still looks very cartoonish. One of the interesting things, so Pixar is evolving. They're coming out with some movie creation, but they have some image stuff in the background. I would sign up for their beta, but Midjourney by far is still probably the best for hyper realistic. Good workflow to test. Lauren King, it really depends on you and your clients. I would go into Make, go to make.com and just go through. They have a section called recipes, and just take a look. There's hundreds of different recipes to test. One of my favorites that's really simple is they have an Instagram reply, a comment reply. That's been pretty fun to play with. That's a really cool one. Abby, can you talk more about those listed tools, specifically DALL-E, Jasper, and Make? Absolutely. So DALL-E 3 is owned by OpenAI, and it's integrated directly with ChatGPT. So if you're in ChatGPT and you have the paid version, you can ask it to create an image and it'll automatically integrate with DALL-E and make images. I just haven't been thrilled with the quality of the output. But if you're looking for simple things that you could put on an Instagram post or specify it, the one caveat I will tell you with any image generation, none of them have mastered the ability to include text. So any image generation tool that has text integrated into it, it's going to botch it. It's just they have not perfected that. The one I would probably play with is inside of Illustrator. They have come the closest because AI does own a fonts library. So if you're looking to create vector images, I would play with Adobe Illustrator's AI and see what type of vector images you can produce. But anything with text is pretty weak. But hyper realistic, if you're looking for people, if you are looking to perfect image fill and you want it to be hyper realistic, Adobe Photoshop has that mastered. I would suggest just going on YouTube and look at Adobe Photoshop image fill and just look at, there's hundreds of thousands of videos on how people have expanded images to go from there. Aaron, as a complete newbie, do you have a recommendation on where to start? Do I start with YouTube? So I take a class? I'm biased. I would make sure you follow Nama and take a look at the GOAT marketing show. We have a ton of prompts. Download the prompt list we have that we've provided for Nama and just go in and play with it. That is probably the simplest, best way. If you use the briefing prompt to start on even the free version of ChatGPT, it's enough for you to go in there and be able to experiment and go with it. I don't think you necessarily need to take a class. You could probably spend an hour, go in there, and then maybe go look on YouTube and see where it goes. But you can always reach out to us too if you have questions. We're happy to have you on the show and walk through it with you. Rhett, what is your biggest watch out? You mentioned it already with SME still needing to be us. Any examples? The most interesting thing is when you set the briefing prompts, the more time you take to preface and answer those questions genuinely, to give it source data, if you can give it examples of you speaking or give it examples of content you've created, it will allow you to replicate somewhat of a brand persona and stay on task. You can also set limiting parameters. Like you can tell ChatGPT only work within that. But if you're going to go to the level of being a subject matter expert, I would encourage you to look more at creating a GPT rather than just using the open chat. And I'll show you that in a second, because you can set the guardrails and tell it not to look outside somewhere else, and will only give you specific sets of data inside there. Abby, that's interesting. I have not asked it too many times to cite its sources. The few times I've had, it didn't cite them all, but I want to play with that now that it's updated its data. Abby had just said she's asked ChatGPT to cite sources and it's worked well. Catherine, I have concerns about AI generation, copyright issues. We've used a little bit for mockups, but I think copyright's still coming up. I think copyright's going to be an issue for a while on this, but again, I'm not a lawyer and it varies based on that. I know you mentioned Firefly. They do have copyright information right on the production, so it is a bit of a safer tool for that. We do have someone on our team. They did a webinar on copyright issues. I'll see if I can dig up a link to that. Laura, you had asked, do you find that content generated is repetitive? Same keywords, objectives? Yes, 100%. If you just come in and you mail it in and you just say, hey, help me come up with 10 content ideas for how to lose weight, 100%, you're going to get generally the same. This is why the briefing prompt is so vital. You need to make sure that you specify who you're targeting, who you are as a brand, how you specifically solve problems. And that's why we started with the customer journey mapping. If you don't have a customer journey map and don't have a clear idea of your solution and how you specifically solve problems, start there. Do not use ChatGPT unless you have a defined customer journey. You understand the problems like we gave in the Upside framework. And normally we go much more in depth, but we only had an hour today. But that'll give you the specifications of setting yourself apart versus if everyone else is using AI to produce content. Garbage in, garbage out. The more specific you are in the beginning, the better the output will be. Ben, any other questions you see? I don't see any texts. I'm just going to check the questions panel real quick. The tools, we had an anonymous attendee. So what were the tools you showed for specifically? So the tools that we showed in there were just a brief set. Dolly 3, that is for image creation. Otter does transcripts, but to be honest, if you're using Zoom, I would just use Zooms now. Jasper is a copywriting tool. It is really effective if you don't have a background in copywriting and don't understand different copywriting frameworks. Otter is really good at specifying when to use which ones. And it does produce really high quality copy for emails, landing pages, etc. But if you learn the art of prompt engineering, you can accomplish the same thing in Chat GPT-4. Any other questions? I think after this, you will get a recording of the email. They'll provide the email. If you have questions, please reach out to us. You can reach out to us on social media, or myself, my team. Just follow us, Giant Goat. We'll be happy to chime in, answer the questions. We also cover it on our show. So if you have content ideas, we're there to provide as much as we can. Kind of help. I have tried Copilot. We are having a lot of success with ChatGPT and the integrations right now. And because of the ability to integrate chat into Make and the workflow automations, we tend to be spending more time there. But it will be interesting, as I mentioned, to see how bigger platforms integrate deeper. So Microsoft Copilot into its whole suite. I'm looking forward to the point where we see the competition of things like Adobe being able to take prompts and create video content, images, be able to push it in InDesign for really deep presentations, or Google doing it in Google Slides, or Microsoft being able to take, a summary in Word and push it into PowerPoint. So I think the next little while for AI is going to be really cool to see how it bridges the gap from prompts to copy to production, ultimately to video over the next little while. I do believe we're at time. So if there's any other questions, please feel free to forward them via email, send them to Nama. Make sure you check their calendar for additional webinars. They have some great ones coming up, so make sure you register for those. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help you in this crazy AI world that we live in now. Thanks, everybody.